What's up, guys? It's Zero here. Dead Space 4 versus a Dead Space 2 remake. Let's talk about it. So a massive talking point in the community right now is what should be the next title coming out of EA Motive. Obviously, EA Motive are the folks who made the Dead Space remake, and the question has been really coming up quite a bit in articles and things of that nature through news media as well as the community on what should be the next project worked on by EA Motive. Should it be a Dead Space 2 remake or should it be Dead Space 4? I have pounded this table a multitude of times, guys, on the YouTube channel where I've talked about Dead Space 4 and why this game needs to exist and needs to continue pushing this franchise forward. Obviously, the Dead Space remake made a ton of sense because obviously a lot of people who played Dead Space way back in the day, it really reintroduces this iconic franchise, and EA Motive absolutely knocked the Dead Space remake out of the park. And so now the question lies, as EA and EA Motive, do you do a Dead Space 2 remake and then a Dead Space 3 remake and then do a Dead Space 4? Or do you jump ahead to Dead Space 4? I'm going to be giving you guys my opinions here, and obviously we're going to be going through the pros and cons of going either way, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section down below. If EA Motive were to make a Dead Space 4 next, I believe that it's really going to push the franchise forward. I think that in a number of ways you could easily do a Dead Space 2 as well as a Dead Space 3 reskin, essentially, not doing a full-blown remake like EA Motive did with the Dead Space 1 remake, and you could just do, obviously a remaster of certain sorts for the next-gen consoles while the primary team and core members are working on a Dead Space 4. I think if you release Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3 as a Dead Space collection where it's reskinned in a number of ways, where it has updated graphics and things of that nature, I think that, obviously getting the Dead Space remake, what we see is a lot of the old players that played the, original Dead Space trilogy have come back, and then it's also introduced Dead Space to the masses in a major way. And EA Motive obviously crushing this thing and really knocking it out of the park really gives me a clear indication that they have a vision for what they want to do in the future with this franchise. I believe if they went and did a Dead Space 2 remake, I believe that they would knock that out of the park. And a Dead Space 3, they actually may make the Dead Space 3 remake better than the original Dead Space 3, because I thought Dead Space 3 was a turn in the wrong direction for the franchise. So much can change, though, over the years when we talk about the gaming landscape at large. And if you focus all your resource and development on a Dead Space 2 remake and then a Dead Space 3 remake, and then you finally get to Dead Space 4, a lot of those core members of EA Motive may end up going to do other projects and things of that nature. And I feel like you really got to strike while the iron's hot. Making a Dead Space 4 and releasing a Dead Space collection, in my mind, makes complete sense, because it's going to get those who haven't played the other two games, that being Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3, it's going to get those to play that on a collection basis instead of, waiting for the absolute remakes to come out. And I think that a Dead Space 4 is really going to push the franchise forward. And when I say that, obviously with what happened at the very end of Dead Space 3, I'm someone who would love to see what happens after, Dead Space 3. Is Isaac Clarke going to become the villain in Dead Space 4? Or how is it going to work in terms of the marker and everything else that was left off in Dead Space 3? And in what direction could they potentially go in? I think there's a lot of directions they could go in, whether Isaac Clarke remains the main character or he becomes the villain and a new character is, brought into the fray. I think there's so many different ways that EA Motive and a lot of ideas that they could really throw around and really, continue pushing this franchise forward. Because when you think about it, we've gotten, movies made out of this franchise. We've gotten, comic books. And I think that there's so much more that could be added along with not only, a Dead Space 4, but all the different things that could come along with it, collectibles and, so on and so forth, new books, all kinds of things things that they could do with a Dead Space 4 to really build upon the legacy, the lore, the story, and I think it would be absolutely awesome. And I believe Dead Space could take the throne as one of the top games in all of the horror genre. On the flip side, Dead Space 2 being a remake and them working on that, why that would work is because obviously the Dead Space 1 remake was so good, and the Dead Space 2 remake, which I believe Dead Space 1 was absolutely awesome, guys, an iconic game, you know, when it originally came out. Dead Space 2, I think, improved upon pretty much everything from the first game and actually topped the first game in my book. Now, Dead Space 3, obviously, I felt went, you know, in a wrong direction, that being they were focused on action versus horror, and, you know, obviously the first two games were based upon horror over action, and I think that with Dead Space 2 being a remake, EA Motive, they obviously have a passion for this franchise, and so they would knock a Dead Space 2 remake out of the park. From a pure business perspective, it would make a lot of sense for EA to want to do a Dead Space 2 remake because Dead Space 1's remake was a smash success. And so they may want to pressure EA Motive to do a Dead Space 2 remake and then a Dead Space 3 remake and then a Dead Space 4. I just believe them doing a Dead Space collection that would include Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3 being reskinned for the new consoles with some updated graphics and focusing on a Dead Space 4, to me, would be awesome for the franchise. And it would really, not only would people be able to play those other games, but they would also be able to see the clear future for the franchise. And I trust EA Motive in a major way. After the Dead Space 1 remake, they did an incredible job. I can see just how precise, and that team over there, how ingrained they are within this franchise. But I would love to hear from you guys. What do you all think? Do you think we're going to get a Dead Space 4 or a Dead Space 2 remake next? And what would you rather have next from EA Motive? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And at the end of the gameplay, watch my next Dead Space 4 video. And if you guys enjoy, make sure you leave a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, stay positive, just keep grinding. And as always, I'll talk to you guys all in the next one. Peace.
God, took one step out of the captain's nest and Chen, that thing, he almost got me.
You okay?
I trapped him in a damaged escape pod. He's snarling like, this is fucked up. Hurry, Isaac.
Hazardous anomaly detected. Quarantine activated. detected.
Daniels isn't answering her rig link. What's your status?
I found a shock pad I can use on the barricade. I'm heading back there now.
Watch the voltage on that pad. I'm not losing anyone else.